I wanted to talk about Rob Zombie, if you could entertain some Rob Zombie talk. He was on an episode of Howie Mandel not too long ago. Turns out Howie Mandel's got a podcast that's like somewhat.
Everybody does.
It's up, yeah, you know, like leave some for the fish, you know, like it doesn't need to be Conan O'Brien and every person that was famous 10 years ago with a very popular podcast. If you know, I would listen if he did the whole thing as Bobby from Bobby's World. It's like, well, next we're gonna talk to Rob Zombie.
That's a tough voice to do.
Dr. New.
A lot of kids come up to me and they say, Bobby. So I say what?
So Rob Zombie talked about his Halloween experience because he made Halloween 2007 the only reboot of the series, unless you want to count the 2018 trilogy. You know, 'cause it's like a soft reboot in as much as they sequelized the first one. And isn't it interesting? They got David Gordon Green to then like try that same shit on The Exorcist, and apparently it just didn't, like, people aren't going for it. So they were talking about you know, people don't really like those Rob Zombie Halloween movies, but he was talking about how he had a really bad experience making them, and he made them for Dimension. So if anybody doesn't know, Dimension was a subsidiary or like a child company of Miramax when Harvey and Bob ran it. Harvey and Bob Weinstein, the disgraced Harvey Weinstein and his brother who threw him under the bus, as I recall. Like when the allegations were coming out, he'd started like writing his brother emails like, "How could you do this?" Or I'm like, oh, he didn't know every single thing that was going on. I swear I didn't.
Just have to write a paper trail.
Yeah. And I condemn these actions, Javi,
that I did not know of.
Yeah, give me a fucking break. But you know, the legends around these guys well before all the allegations came out was that and the convictions thereafter was that they were really hard to work for. And I remember, you know, I've talked on here about Project Greenlight before. It was like this reality show about making movies in the early 2000s when like those guys were pioneers and kind of like a tier indie film. You know, they sort of made Quentin Tarantino happen, you know, and they took risks, and that's kind of where we're going with it. But Dimension was really, like, I think, you know, one of their biggest properties, of course, was Scream, the Scream trilogy, and they did Halloween H2O, actually. You know, that era. I don't know if I can name all, but like, you know, like the Scream poster, like young people against a black background looking like models. You know, that Dimension made.
I know what you did last summer was like in that same vein. Yeah.
I don't know if they made that, but they might as well have, you know. They did, Dimension did Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back.
Oh.
Whereas Miramax did Chasing Amy and, you know, like Clerks and stuff, or they distributed Clerks. Anyway, so he goes, I had a miserable time making the movie because Bob Weinstein was up my ass the whole time, because Bob ran Dimension. So if you were making a movie for Dimension, you had to listen to Bob the whole time. And he said, after he had like a cut of the movie, Bob was like, I fucking hate this movie, every frame of this fucking movie. And these guys were really profane. Yeah, that's why I brought up Project Greenlight, because they did Good Will Hunting. And so like Matt and Ben were big parts of that whole scene. And I remember like the plot of those shows was like, so on Tuesday, Harvey's going to see the movie, and you know, it was like okay to be openly hostile and profane in the workplace back then. It was cool in a way. It was like, that's Hollywood, baby.
Yeah, it's like the Tropic Thunder Tom Cruise character.
Yeah,
or whatever.
Honestly, very much so. Yeah. And he said, I fucking hate this movie. I hate it. I hate every frame of it. You got to hire a different editor. We're going to get you a different editor. Which is kind of funny because, like, I just can't even imagine. Like, we know how troubled so many productions are, and how they must, like, what they find in post-production when they rush shoot like a Disney TV series or something. I'm not saying they need a Bob Weinstein in their lives, but maybe the pendulum has swung too far the other way. Where they're like, I think we can make it work. I think we'll just put it out and let it flop. You know?
To have some fun.
I'm trying to get rid of some of this money.
Weed content.
So he made him hire some pro editor or something when Rob had his own editor, and I guess they paid a high rate for this guy to sit around and not help them. because they just ended up doing their own thing. And then like the day before the movie was gonna come out, he was like, this thing's gonna bomb. I don't want to put this out. This sucks. Bob was saying that. And then they put it out and it made 30 million like in its opening day or something. And at the time in 2007 for like a Halloween reboot, that was like, it performed very, very well, way ahead of expectations. I remember when it came out, I remember people were talking about it, right? And going out to see it.
Yeah. It seems like people actually wanted to see it and it was popular.
Yeah. I mean, it didn't stand the test of time. It didn't really survive the weekend, but it made money. And then Rob said, he was like, then Bob predictably started talking about how he loved the movie all along. He believed in the movie all along. But this is the part I found, the part I found fascinating was he tried to like call the office, and Bob and Harvey, they were like, Bob and Harvey have been in Harvey's office all morning screaming at each other. And it was like, why? And he was like, well, they're insisting that like they should have known this was going to overperform. And if it was going to, then they should have made double, because see, they could have put this star in it, or they had this person they could have attached, and like, and they're arguing about, should we put it on more screens right now? And and he was like, and what's interesting about working for those guys is back then anyway, things would be caught in development hell forever. You'd talk to a studio, you wouldn't get called back. You didn't know whether or not your project was happening for a while. He's like, you talk to Bob and Harvey, like they would greenlight you pretty fast if they liked what was going, or if they liked what you were doing, you were in production pretty quick. And he's like, and then you're already behind schedule and they're already screaming at you. And it just kind of, it made me, it seemed quaint in a way that like, there's something to be learned from that, I think. Obviously it was as toxic and hostile and abusive and evil as you get. But those guys were extremely successful in the movie industry, and they won a lot of Academy Awards, and they made a lot of movies, and a lot of those movies were really good. And so we shouldn't copy them. But because they're just too,
especially their extracurricular activities.
Yeah, right. But
which actually, yeah,
there's something to be said about a creative dictatorship and about micromanaging things. Micromanaging gets a bad rap, I feel. When like sometimes you need to, there needs to be a visionary who's got his nose in it. These guys were, I'm sure, were frequently wrong. But they were frequently right too.
Well, yeah, I think it helps if somebody actually has some sort of taste and vision,
right?
And yeah, and direction. If people need direction, because you can't just film a bunch of stuff like if people say like Marvel directors and writers, they're cast, they're not actually hired,
Yeah.
So there's something where you're intentionally cast because you have a vision and you're put up to a high standard, and they're going to yell at you the whole time. So.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you live in the world of risk, so those guys were always playing a big game of risk. They were always putting millions of their own company's dollars up to try something that might not work. Obviously the much healthier version of that exists today is like A24 and Blumhouse and stuff. But
yes.
I just thought that was really interesting. That like there's still, there's something to be said, because we talk so often about like how are we going to get to the next stage of film? How are we going to get to that next place where exciting stuff is being made? And I think the way it's going to happen is through like a period of experimentation. There's going to be like lower cost productions, taking chances on unknown people and trying things out. Because as you said about like casting the creative team for a Marvel film, because what's going on there is they're like, well, we have a slate. We're making a Fantastic Four movie or whatever on, for 2027. One way or another, we're doing that. And frankly, the visual effects team and a lot of our kind of standing engineers are going to make a whole lot of the movie. And so what we really, you hear Kathleen Kennedy and Kevin Feige, they'll say stuff like this. They're like, what we're really looking for is seasoned leadership. What they're talking about is like, we just need somebody who can run a big production. We don't really care that much about the creativity. We just need somebody who can kind of like get us efficiently through, 2 months of shooting. So, a manager, a good manager,
Yeah.
That's why she's like, oh, Ron Howard would be great.
Yes, exactly. Well, they said, didn't A24 say they're branching out and they're going to start doing like action movies? They're going to start doing. So I think you're going to see a lot of more lower budget, but riskier type stuff.
Yeah.
From A24. And I think a lot of, you saw Oppenheimer did really well. And, Chris Nolan was like, I'm so glad that this did well. We didn't really expect it to. And it like gives me hope that there's going to be more, successful things that are not just, what we've been seeing.
Yeah. And you can't put a dime on those Marvel movies at this point. Or, at this point, like what event IP movie would have to come out that you'd be like, oh, that'll definitely make a lot of money. It would take like, a visionary version of X-Men or something we haven't seen in a while. It would take like something really big, but you can't bet on like, oh, I'm sure like Indiana Jones will make money. Yeah.
Subscribe to Red Cow Entertainment on Patreon for full episodes every other week.